All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to completely recontextualize the largest conflict in human history by uncovering its most bizarre and shocking realities. We all learn the standard textbook dates and the major battles, but today we're zooming in on the strange, the hidden, and the downright absurd facets of World War II.
So, what do potato bugs, Coca-Cola, and Charlie Chaplin have in common? I know, it sounds like the setup to a weird joke, right? But it actually signals right away that we are going far beyond your standard history textbook today. Because believe it or not, these three completely unrelated things were all deeply intertwined with the global war effort in ways that will definitely shock you.
Section 1. Prelude to the conflict. The deceptive buildup.
This was a period entirely defined by intense deception and secret ambitions. The Axis powers were already brewing these massive plans behind the scenes, all while the rest of the world was just desperately trying to avoid another global conflict. The contrast is honestly stark. Look at Germany. They hosted the Olympics, promised peace to the whole world, but their hidden agenda? They were rapidly, secretly arming up their military throughout the 1930s. Then you have Germany and the USSR signing this highly publicized non-aggression pact, while literally secretly plotting to just carve up Eastern Europe between themselves. And meanwhile, Britain and the Allies, they pursued appeasement to avoid war at absolutely all costs, completely ignoring the fact that Czechoslovakia was excluded from the very treaties deciding its own fate.
And speaking of facades, did you know that one of history's most universally hated symbols was actually stolen? Yeah, it was completely perverted from ancient civilizations spanning from Greece all the way to India. Long before it was ever plastered on war machines, the swastika derived from a Sanskrit word for a hooked cross, and it originally meant fertility and good fortune.
Moving on to Section 2. Bizarre tactics and weapons. The absurdities of war.
Okay, the 40 million potato bug plot. You heard that right. In the early days of the conflict, the Nazis seriously considered weaponizing the Colorado potato beetle. The big idea was to drop these pests all over British farmland to devastate their crops and literally starve the island nation. But thankfully, the whole plan was ultimately scrapped because, well, they just couldn't feasibly collect the 40 million bugs they needed for the mission.
Actually, both sides resorted to some incredibly odd strategies. During the so-called phony war, Britain's Royal Air Force was dropping propaganda leaflets over Germany instead of actual bombs. Then, on the financial front, Hitler forced concentration camp prisoners to forge $132 million in British pounds. His goal? To trigger massive hyperinflation in the UK economy. There was even outright musical plagiarism. The famous Nazi Sieg Heil March song? It was a direct rip-off of the Harvard University fight song, just because the composer happened to go to school there. But honestly, perhaps the strangest tactic of all was Hitler's own deputy, Rudolf Hess, parachuting into Scotland in 1941. He actually thought he could negotiate peace by himself, only to be instantly arrested and imprisoned for life.
Which brings us to Section 3. The dictator's fatal blunders. Cascading failures.
As the war progressed, the Axis leadership began making catastrophic mistakes that would ultimately doom their terrifying empire. The Battle of Britain is just the perfect example of this. Despite being heavily outmatched in pure numbers, the British used the doubting system's rapid radar reporting to completely foil the Nazi aerial bombardment. Get this, the Royal Air Force had around 3,700 total planes, and less than half of those were high-speed fighters, going up against Luftwaffe's 4,200 aircraft. But by utilizing that rapid radar information sharing between the ground and the air, Britain's defense systems were far more accurate, and Germany ended up suffering much heavier losses.
In a really rapid chain of events, we witnessed the dictator's fatal unforced errors. He essentially opened up a brutal two-front war against massive global superpowers. First, after totally failing to force a British surrender through the Blitz in 1940, Hitler turns around and launches Operation Barbarossa in June of 1941. He invaded the Soviet Union simply because he saw it as prime real estate for his empire. And then, as if that wasn't enough, in December 1941, he needlessly declared war on the United States right after the attack on Pearl Harbor.
84. That staggering number is exactly how many of his own generals Hitler executed, as he grew increasingly paranoid. This was especially true after he survived the Operation Valkyrie bomb plot, which, crazily enough, was an assassination attempt planned by his very own military inner circle.
All right, Section 4. Quirks of the home front. Cultural shifts.
Let's dive into how daily civilian life was completely upended. These bizarre quirks reveal a home front that was frantically adjusting to war. For instance, because the word hamburger had German roots, it was literally rebranded as the Liberty Steak in America. And Coca-Cola? They went out of their way to set up entire plants in North Africa just to ship millions of bottles and keep troops fueled with their essential sugary soda. Meanwhile, when Hollywood studios refused to touch the subject, Charlie Chaplin actually spent his own money to self-fund his anti-Nazi satire film, The Great Dictator. Oh, and over in England, the absolute terror of the London Blitz forced parents to evacuate their children to the countryside, a massive cultural shift that directly inspired C.S. Lewis to write The Origins of Narnia.
Now, the Nazis' racial obsession was completely blinding, and this next story proves it perfectly. In a brilliant act of sabotage, an anti-Nazi photographer submitted a photo of a Jewish infant to Joseph Goebbels' poster contest, a contest specifically searching for the perfect German baby, and the completely oblivious Nazis actually selected it. They used it as their nationwide symbol of purity, totally unaware of the child's true heritage.
Even the glitz and glamour of Hollywood wasn't immune to the war effort. Massive stars actually strapped on army greens. We're talking household names here. Walter Matthau, Peter Fonda, David Niven, and Christopher Lee, they all served. But ironically, the ultimate all-American on-screen cowboy, John Wayne, he actually stayed home due to a football injury.
Moving into the realm of science, Section 5, developing the atomic bomb, the nuclear age.
Behind the battlefields, this chilling race was underway. It all started because paranoia over German progress was accelerating a massive North American collaboration. First, these false rumors spread of a Nazi A-bomb intended for the U.S. West Coast, which would have supposedly used conventional explosives and uranium. This immense fear directly led to the next step, Canada actually merging its advanced Tube Alloys nuclear project with the United States Manhattan Project to really speed up development. And all of this manpower, all this money, it finally culminated in the Trinity test, the very first successful atomic bomb detonation taking place in a New Mexico desert.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. Hearing J. Robert Oppenheimer quote that Hindu scripture, well, it really makes us reflect on the profound horror the creators felt upon witnessing that successful New Mexico test. The immense power of the weapon they had just birthed left them absolutely terrified of the very thing they worked so hard to create.
Crucially, the only two nuclear bombs ever used in combat were actually vastly different pieces of devastating technology. Little Boy was powered by the fission of uranium-235, but Fat Man, it used an entirely different mechanism, powered by plutonium, making it a staggering 40% more powerful than its predecessor.
Finally, Section 6, Humanity Amidst the Horror, Unsung Heroes.
Despite the staggering death toll, there was incredible resilience and humanity that shone through the darkness. Just look at these acts of defiance and hope. Denmark, despite being fully occupied, managed to smuggle the vast majority of its Jewish population to neutral Sweden. Then you have U.S. Master Sergeant Roderick Edmonds. He bravely saved 300 Jewish POWs by staring down his Nazi captors and declaring, "We are all Jews," literally risking his own life and his entire unit to deter war crimes. And on the scientific front, the widespread, consistent use of blood transfusions in combat for the first time, that medical miracle saved unprecedented numbers of severely injured troops who otherwise would never have made it home. And file this under, you can't make this stuff up. Believe it or not, the good Hitler, William Patrick Stewart Houston, was actually Adolf Hitler's own half-nephew. He immigrated to the United States, joined the U.S. Navy specifically to fight his mad uncle, and even won a Purple Heart for his service against the Axis powers. No way, right? So I want to leave you with this final, kind of provocative thought. Did World War II ever truly end? Because technically, Russia and Japan never signed a formal peace treaty due to disputes over seized islands. So are the lingering geopolitical scars of this war still quietly bleeding today? It's a fascinating question, and it really shows us that history isn't just stuck in the past, it is absolutely still shaping our world right now. Thanks for joining me on this explainer.